Euthanasia is directly or indirectly bringing about the death of another person for the person's sake. It is derived from the Greek words meaning good death and evokes the idea of causing or contributing to someone's end and bestowing a good unto that person. In today's society, many people are living way beyond what people used to live beyond due to modern advances. And with these new discoveries come new and troubling issues. One such question is the moral rightness of killing or letting die for the good of that patient. Doctors and nurses everywhere have sworn to an oath to preserve life and to relieve suffering. However, how can we truly accomplish this when the only way to end suffering is to end life? This decision is not always black and white, and in cases of patients with a terminal illness, the patient is in such a state of extreme suffering that the only way to help ease their pain is through assisted suicide or euthanasia. We all have thought of this at one time or another. What would I do if I were in this situation, or if my family member were suffering from a terminal illness? Would I choose to help end their suffering by ending their life? It's easy for us to say what we would do, what we would not do when not faced with that situation, and something completely different when we are faced with the harsh reality of having to actually choose between life and death. I know that some of you probably had loved ones who have been in the hospital who have suffered from illnesses and have probably passed, and were probably in extreme pain, and somewhere in the back of your mind you probably felt a sense of relief because they were no longer suffering. We all have to face death of a loved one at some time or another in our lives, whether it be from cancer or from brain damage caused by some catastrophic accident, or whether it's something that causes a diminished standard of living for that person. It just seems to me that it just seems that it's inhumane to allow someone to suffer in extreme pain just because of my perceived perception of what is moral and what is right. And if they choose to do so, and if they're competent, they're sane, if they're not in a state of duress, and they know what they're doing, I believe it's ultimately their right to choose to end life if they're so willing. And I'm not for euthanasia or physician suicide in every case, but there are exceptions. I ultimately believe that it is everyone's right to, if they feel that the quality of their life has reached a point where there's no hope for a meaningful life, to end it. And if they so choose to, I hope for them that there's not much difference than a person abstaining from life-saving treatments and euthanasia. If a patient is faced with life-threatening issues and decides to end life, the decision should ultimately be theirs, and not the decision, it should never be left in the hands of politicians or the states. Ultimately, it should be that person's decision. So as long as they make the decision with a clear mind, they're not under any duress, and there's no depression, I believe that there should always be protocols to follow, psychological evaluations. They should be studied to make sure that they're not depressed. Like I said, if they're depressed, and if they're found to be competent and sane, then ultimately the decision is theirs. They know what they're doing, and I believe that it should be their decision ultimately. And many opponents believe that opponents of euthanasia believe that physicians ultimately should always strive to relieve suffering and never to end the life of that sufferer. However, also, people believe as well that if doctors are given this authority to end life, it will undermine their trustworthiness. However, these arguments are what we would call arguments based on a slippery slope. So it's a slippery slope, which means that one does not lead to another. However, there are proponents of euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide strongly argue that active euthanasia appeals to the principle of beneficence, which is mercy. And as a bioethicist, Dan W. Brock once stated, if we are ever in a state of or a position to relieve the severe suffering of a patient without any excess cost to ourselves, we have a duty to do so, and we should and not to do so would be cruel and inhumane and wrong. While proponents also believe that the right to die, though strong, does not necessarily compel others, proponents do not believe that this right to end life should ever be forced upon others. For example, physicians should never be forced to help patients die or to choose death. And if we truly believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then we must respect the wishes of those who do choose to end life and to end the suffering from intolerable pain. And we should never allow our own ideas of morality or what is right or wrong to ever stand in the way of these people from choosing their own fate, basically. And if people who face terminal illness are ever in a situation where they feel that their life is just at a point that it is not worth living, it's their decision, and ultimately it should be left up to them. And I cannot stress that enough, that's just how I feel. And a lot of people think that if we ever do allow this, that states or politicians will take advantage of those that don't have a voice for themselves, such as the homeless or the poor. But here in the States and in a lot of other Western countries, Western civilizations, there are laws in place that help protect the homeless or the poor. So something like that, although I will never say it could never happen, it is highly unlikely that it ever would, because, like I said, there are laws in place that helps to protect these people. So we never would have to worry about something like that, pretty much. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard of a case I guess it happened in 1990 of Terri Schiavo. While in the hospital, she suffered from a sudden heart failure, and by the time that doctors were able to revive her, she had suffered catastrophic brain failure, and it was irreversible. And she would remain in that state for many years, and it's a state of what doctors call a persistent state of vegetation. And like I said, she remained like that for many years, and she had feeding tubes, and water was injected into her body through tubes. She would continue to exist without consciousness or intentional behavior. And Michael Schiavo, her husband, and Terri Schiavo's parents would fight for years in the courts. Michael claiming that before all this happened, before she was hospitalized, that they had they were having a conversation, and that Terri said that she would rather die than be artificially sustained. While Terry's parents had a different view. They felt that one day, they as parents normally do, they hoped that one day she would come revive, or show some sign of life. But it never happened, and as I said, they fought bitterly in the courts for years and years. Ultimately, her parents would lose the battle, and Michael had her tubes removed. And I think it happened on March 31st of 2005, and 13 days afterwards, she would die. And another case that I can think of is that of Dr. Jack Kevorkian, whose willingness to facilitate the death of terminally ill patients earned him admiration, also condemnation, and ultimately some jail time. He argued unrelentingly that consenting patients should be allowed to alleviate their suffering with the help of a physician, and dismissed his critics as being enthralled to superstition or religious dogma. He was a strong advocate that people should have the right to choose to end their life if they were in intolerable pain caused by irreversible illness or accidents. And Herbert Hendon, a psychiatrist who has done extensive research on this issue, believes that individuals should and always have decent end of life care. And like I said, those that argue against euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide believe that it goes against what they call the instinct of every human to continue living. But that argument, I understand where it comes from, but it goes against a person's autonomy, which is self-governance, and just basically just doing what they feel is best in their own best interest. And then, like I said, it should never be left up to a politician or states. It's all, if a person is competent and, like I said, not in duress or depressed, it ultimately should be their decision. And one of the reasons why I say that is because there was a case in I think it was 2006, of a man, Mr. Wilby, in Italy, who had suffered from muscular dystrophy for 40 years and had written many letters to Italy's president, and who was completely sane, and he did not suffer from any depression, and he wished to end his life, but every time he was denied by the courts to do so, and his life, it just deteriorated. He was, like I said, he was bound to the bed. He could no longer breathe on his own. He was losing his capacity to speak, to eat, and he was a man that truly loved life and enjoyed living and enjoyed what life, things that came with life. But he felt like his life was just at a point where it was just not livable, and and he had no dignity. So he chose to end it, and he was denied many times. And I know euthanasia is a touchy subject. Some people are adamant about it should never be done, and some people believe that in extreme cases that we should show compassion to people. And I don't want you to misconstrue my stance on euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide. I am in no way for the systematic eradication of people because they fall ill. I'm only stating that it would be wrong of us as human beings to deny people the right to choose their own fate because of our own perception of what is right or what we think is moral. And I believe that if we as a society, if we honor these wishes, we should never impose our perceptions on people. And it's, like I said, it's one thing to say what you would do in one situation, and another completely if you had to face that situation in real life. And I ultimately believe that the right to end life should be everyone's right and should never be interfered with by states, people, religion, or governments of any kind. It's ultimately the person's decision, and that's basically it for me.